Three countries banned Singapore from buying their sand. It kept building new land anyway. That's 163 square kilometers of ground that didn't exist in 1960, an area bigger than the entire country of Bermuda, 3 times over. Singapore didn't buy or annex any of it. It built it. So where did 65 years of new land actually come from? Singapore didn't shift a border. It built the ground itself, one shipload of sand at a time. The UN's Environment Program ran the numbers independently and landed on the same story. 23% growth in 45 years, 137 more square kilometers of Singapore. 2 different sources, one unmistakable trend. 6 separate megaprojects account for most of it. An oil hub, a port, an airport, a military island, and a brand new coastline still on the drawing board. Together, they've reshaped almost every edge of the island. How do you turn 7 separate islands into one? Singapore spent the 1990s fusing them into Jurong Island, finished 20 years ahead of schedule. What do you even put on 3,500 brand new hectares? Enough underground oil storage to fill more than 500 Olympic swimming pools. Today, Jurong Island hosts some of the biggest names in global petrochemicals, an entire industry standing on ground that didn't exist 30 years ago. Even the underground caverns are man-made. Marina Bay was open water until the 1990s. Marina Bay Sands, Gardens by the Bay, and 2 financial districts all rose on land that used to be sea. So how do you build a megaport from scratch? At Tuas, engineers are lowering 221 caissons, each 10 stories tall, to form an 8.6-kilometer seawall. Where does an already packed island fit a whole new terminal? Changi is reclaiming over 1,000 hectares of seabed just to find room. Construction broke ground in 2025 on contracts worth 4.5 billion Singapore dollars for a terminal targeting 50 million passengers a year. It won't open until the 2030s. Punggol tells the same story on a smaller scale. Reclamation there grew from 277 hectares in 1983 to 840 by 2001. Enough new ground for a whole waterfront town. So what do you actually do with a park-sized slice of new coastline? Singapore's biggest park, all 185 hectares of it, sits entirely on reclaimed seabed. Every hectare in every project above started as sand, dredged off an ocean floor and shipped in, ton by ton. That sand had to come from somewhere. Singapore became the world's largest sand importer per person, bringing in roughly 5 tons of sand for every single resident. No other country came close. So who was selling all that sand? One by one, the countries supplying it started shutting the door. A 2021 academic study traced the trade. Most of Singapore's sand in that era came from Cambodia and Myanmar, with smaller shares from the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Indonesia had been Singapore's single biggest sand supplier for decades, and the relationship was about to end. So what happens when your biggest supplier just stops selling? In 2007, Indonesia banned sand exports to Singapore outright, citing environmental damage and vanishing coastline. Researchers and environmental groups traced dozens of small Indonesian islands disappearing to the sand mining that had been feeding Singapore's growth. So exactly how many countries were losing sand to Singapore? At least 5, according to independent trade research, and one 2010 watchdog investigation named specific firms still shipping it illegally. As one Indonesian campaign group put it, selling sand abroad let other countries expand their land at the cost of losing their own. Singapore always maintained its sand was bought legally. But Cambodia's own trade records only show 2.8 million tons leaving the country, while Singapore logged 72.8 million tons coming in. Did any of this ever actually get caught? In 2024, Indonesian authorities intercepted 2 Singapore-flagged dredgers, each capable of moving up to 100,000 cubic meters of sand a trip. Indonesia's ban held for 16 years, until 2023, when the government reopened sea sand exports under new rules. So today, Singapore is back to buying sand from some neighbors and locked out by others, a supply chain that can change with a single government decision. So how long does a project like this actually take to plan? 17 years, from the first Dutch feasibility study in 2008 to the finished polder in 2025. How do you keep manufacturing a country when the ground you need keeps getting cut off? Singapore's answer: stop needing so much sand at all. So how do you cut sand use in half? At Pulau Tekong, a new reclamation method finished in September 2025 held the water back instead of pouring sand on top of it. Instead of pouring sand until land rises above the waves, engineers built a 10-kilometer dike and pumped the water out from inside it, a technique borrowed straight from the Netherlands. Keeping land below sea level dry takes more than a dike.
The system also runs on a 116-hectare stormwater pond, 45 kilometers of drainage channels, and 2 permanent pumping stations.
So who actually builds something like this? Singapore hired the Dutch directly, awarding a contract worth hundreds of millions of euros to build the dike and pumping system. Is this the new way Singapore builds forever? Officially, not yet. The government still calls Tekong a pilot, and the results will decide what comes next.
Because the real threat isn't running out of sand anymore. By 2100, seas around Singapore could rise anywhere from 23 centimeters to over a meter and keep climbing after that.
Why does any of this matter so much? Because roughly 30% of Singapore already sits less than 5 meters above the sea. Singapore isn't racing to reclaim more land because it wants a bigger country. It's racing because the sea is coming for the country it already has. So what does defending an entire coastline actually cost? In 2019, Singapore's Prime Minister put a number on it himself, roughly $100 billion over the next century. The next big project isn't a port or an airport. It's Long Island, roughly 800 proposed hectares off the east coast, built specifically as a wall against the sea. Preparatory works begin in late 2026. So what does Singapore get out of a new island besides a seawall? An 18th reservoir, for one, plus a new stretch of public waterfront park.
Even the old shipping port is being uprooted to make room. Its operations moving to Tuas so the old waterfront can be reborn as part of the same defense.
So which ports are actually moving? 4 of them, Tanjong Pagar, Keppel, Pulau Brani, and Pasir Panjang, all shifting operations out to Tuas. So which is it, still growing, or just holding on? Singapore's newest ground, at Tekong, sits below sea level, kept dry only by pumps that can never stop running.
Tomorrow, Costa Rica regrew half its forest. Follow so you don't miss it.